Welcome to another deep dive where we kind of take a stack of sources, and pull out the good stuff, the interesting bits.
Yeah.
And today's stack is all about George Berkeley.
Oh.
18th century Irish philosopher.
Yeah.
That Berkeley.
Uh-huh.
The one who inspired the name of a certain California city.
Whoa.
Known for its, shall we say, lively academic scene.
Yeah.
Our source material are excerpts from a Spanish language biography of Berkeley.
Okay.
And it really digs into this core question that'll make you think.
Okay.
What if the world only exists when we perceive it?
That is a question.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating concept and one that Berkeley dedicated his life to exploring.
Yeah.
He's often overshadowed by the giants of British empiricism,
Right.
John Locke and David Hume.
Right.
But Berkeley's life and work were incredibly influential.
Okay, so before we get into the mind-bending stuff, who was this guy?
George Berkeley was born in Kilkenny, Ireland.
Okay.
In 1685. From his early days at Trinity College, Dublin, he was drawn to the newest philosophical and scientific ideas.
Okay.
And later became a priest.
Okay.
Deeply engaged in the social and political issues of his time in Ireland.
So not just a philosopher then?
Not at all.
Okay.
Berkeley was an incredibly active and engaged individual.
Okay.
He traveled extensively through Europe and America.
Wow.
Even trying to establish a college in Bermuda.
A college in Bermuda?
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
Yeah.
But aside from the travel bug,
Mm-hmm.
what else was he up to?
Berkeley's interests were astonishingly wide-ranging.
Oh.
He critiqued Newton's theories of space and time,
Wow.
which was quite radical considering Newton's influence back then.
Yeah.
He proposed economic solutions to financial crises, like establishing a central bank. He even researched the medicinal properties of tar water.
Wow. Okay.
You name it, Berkeley probably had something to say about
This guy's all over the map. It sounds like he lived during a pretty interesting time, too.
He did.
Didn't the 18th century have that whole Enlightenment thing going on?
Exactly. The Enlightenment was a period of immense intellectual and cultural change.
Okay.
It emphasized reason and progress, challenging traditional authority.
Okay.
Really shaking things up in both science and philosophy.
So how did Berkeley, a priest, fit into this world of questioning and challenging traditional beliefs?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And one that highlights the fascinating tension in Berkeley's work.
Okay.
He was a devout man of faith.
Right.
Yet he was also a product of this era
Yeah.
that was questioning the very foundations of belief.
Yeah.
He corresponded with John Locke, a key figure in the English Enlightenment,
Uh-huh.
debating the nature of knowledge and perception.
So he was wrestling with this push and pull between faith and reason.
Mm-hmm.
Must have been an exciting, albeit a little confusing time to be alive.
Yeah.
But let's get back to Berkeley.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that he had some pretty radical ideas.
He did.
Like, what exactly do we mean when we say the world only exists when we perceive it?
Well, to understand that, we have to delve into Berkeley's central philosophical concept,
Okay.
esse f percipi.
Okay.
It's a Latin phrase that means to be is to be perceived.
Okay. To be is to be perceived.
Yeah.
So break that down for me.
Yeah.
Does that mean if I'm not looking at my coffee cup,
Yeah.
it just stops existing?
Berkeley's idea is more nuanced than that.
Okay.
He argued that what we call the material world
Mm-hmm.
isn't some independent substance out there.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, it's a collection of perceptions or ideas existing only within our minds.
Okay.
Think of it like this. If a tree falls in the forest
Right.
and no one is around to hear it,
Yeah.
does it make a sound?
Right.
Berkeley would say no.
Hold on. So my coffee cup only exists when I'm looking at it.
Right.
That seems a bit hard to swallow.
Berkeley wouldn't say things pop in and out of existence with every glance.
Okay.
He proposed that a greater mind, God, acts as the ultimate perceiver, ensuring that things continue to exist,
Right.
even when we aren't looking.
Okay, so God's like this cosmic observer, keeping the universe from blinking out every time I close my eyes.
Right.
But if everything boils down to perception,
Yeah.
how did Berkeley reconcile this with his religious beliefs?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that create a conflict?
Actually, quite the opposite.
Okay.
Berkeley saw this as a way to strengthen his faith.
Okay.
He was concerned that a purely materialistic view,
Uh-huh.
reducing everything to just matter,
Right.
would leave no room for God the soul or any kind of spiritual realm.
Interesting.
His idea was a way to bring faith and the emerging scientific worldview together.
So he was trying to find a middle ground where science and spirituality could coexist.
Exactly. Berkeley argued that our perception is not only how we experience the world, but it's actually the very foundation of reality itself.
Okay.
And for him, this reality was ultimately upheld by the divine.
So it's not just about my individual perception. It's about something much bigger.
Yeah.
With God as the ultimate perceiver holding it all together.
Right.
That's a pretty radical idea, especially for a bishop in the 18th century.
It was radical.
Yeah.
But it also set the stage for some fascinating debates about the nature of reality perception and the role of the mind.
Yeah. This is already making me rethink how I see the world. But you mentioned earlier that Berkeley challenged some of Newton's scientific ideas.
Right.
Didn't Newton pretty much define the science of their time?
He did, and that's what makes Berkeley's critiques so intriguing.
Yeah.
Berkeley, despite being a bishop, engaged deeply with the science of his day.
Okay.
Particularly Newton's physics.
Okay.
For example, he took issue with Newton's concepts of absolute space and time.
Okay, so what's wrong with absolute space and time?
Well, Berkeley argued that we can only perceive things relative to each other, never in some absolute frame of reference.
Right.
And this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because centuries later,
Einstein's theories of relativity would actually support this idea.
Wait, are you saying Berkeley, a bishop in the 1700s, was kind of foreshadowing Einstein?
In a way, yes.
Wow.
Berkeley's questioning of absolute space and time, although seen as unconventional at the time, ended up having a lasting intellectual impact.
Yeah.
He planted a seed that would later blossom into something truly groundbreaking.
Wow, that's a connection I never would have made on my own.
Yeah.
So Berkeley was challenging both philosophical and scientific norms.
Absolutely.
It sounds like he was constantly pushing boundaries and questioning accepted truths.
Absolutely. And his ideas went on to influence not just philosophy and science.
Oh, wow.
But also literature.
Really?
Writers like Jorge Luis Borges and Paul Auster were fascinated by Berkeley's concept of reality as perception.
Okay, now I'm really hooked. I can't wait to hear how Berkeley's ideas made their way into literature.
Yeah.
But that will have to wait for part 2 of our deep dive. Is that it?
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of George Berkeley.
Yeah.
Last time we were talking about how Berkeley's ideas foreshadowed aspects of Einstein's theory of relativity. That's quite a legacy for a priest.
Yeah.
Questioning the science of his day.
It is fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Berkeley's questioning of absolute space and time really did plant seeds that influenced scientific thought in unexpected ways.
So you mentioned that Berkeley's ideas also resonated with some big names in literature. I'm especially curious about Jorge Luis Borges.
Yeah.
Is one of my favorites.
Borges was clearly captivated by Berkeley's idealism.
Oh, okay.
He even referenced Berkeley directly in some of his works.
Oh, really?
Yeah. For instance, there's his early poem, Sunrise, where he calls Berkeley's concept the tremendous conjecture, that the world is an activity of the mind.
So Borges saw Berkeley as more than just a historical figure.
Right.
It sounds like he really engaged with those ideas.
Yes.
Did that influence his writing in any specific ways?
Absolutely. Berkeley was fascinated by the idea that our minds might be the ultimate arbiters of reality.
Okay.
One great example is his short story, Tlunh Akbar, or Bis Tertius.
Okay.
In it, he imagines a world where people actually believe in a form of subjective idealism.
Okay.
Much like Berkeley's philosophy.
So a world where reality is shaped by perception.
Exactly.
That's classic Borges, blending the real and the imagined. It seems like Berkeley's ideas might appeal to writers who like to play with those boundaries.
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
If reality is essentially perception, then writing fiction, creating whole new worlds takes on a whole new dimension.
And speaking of writers who love to blur those lines, we can't forget about Paul Auster. His film, The Inner Life of Martin Frost, is all about exploring Berkeleyan ideas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Auster's film directly tackles those heady themes of perception and reality, if you recall. It's about a writer, Martin Frost, who retreats to a secluded cottage to work on his novel. As he writes, the line between fiction and reality starts to dissolve. And this mysterious woman, Claire, appears. And it's left ambiguous whether she's real or just a product of his imagination.
And of course, Claire just happens to be studying Berkeley.
Exactly.
I remember that film being quite the mind-bender.
Yeah.
But it's a perfect example of how Berkeley's ideas translate into compelling storytelling, isn't it?
Exactly. It forces us to question what is real. Are our perceptions all we have?
Yeah.
And it's no coincidence that the character wrestling with these questions is a writer, someone who shapes reality through language.
So we've got Borges creating these fantastical worlds where subjective reality reigns, and we've got Auster blurring the lines between what's real and imagined.
Yeah.
It seems like Berkeley's influence goes way beyond philosophy textbooks.
It truly does. These powerful ideas can really ripple outwards. Berkeley's focus on the power of the mind has clearly resonated with artists and thinkers across different disciplines.
Yeah, it's making me realize that Berkeley isn't just some abstract philosopher from centuries ago.
Yeah.
His ideas have filtered down into our culture even if we're not aware of it.
That's the beauty of these enduring philosophical questions.
Yes.
They remain relevant and spark new interpretations over time.
All right, but we've been dancing around his central idea for a while now. I think it's time to tackle it head on.
Okay.
That famous to be is to be perceived.
Yeah.
Help me wrap my head around this.
Okay.
What are the real implications of a world where existence is tied to perception?
Well, it challenges us to reconsider what we think we know about reality.
Yeah.
Remember, Berkeley wasn't claiming that things literally disappear when we're not looking.
Right.
He was pushing back against what he saw as the flaws of materialism.
Yeah.
This idea that everything boils down to just matter.
Okay, so it's more about the nature of existence itself rather than objects just vanishing.
Right.
But if everything is perception, what are the consistency of our experiences?
Right.
Why does my coffee cup always appear in the same spot on my desk?
Berkeley argued that the consistency we experience is due to the laws of nature, which he saw as expressions of God's will.
Okay.
God isn't just passively observing, he's actively maintaining the order and regularity of the universe.
So God's like the ultimate stage manager.
Right.
Keeping everything running smoothly. Even though the audience, us, are constantly shifting our focus.
Right.
That's a helpful way to visualize it.
It's a vivid analogy, but it gets at the heart of Berkeley's idea. God isn't some distant entity. He's intimately involved in the fabric of reality, ensuring its stability.
That's quite different from the clockmaker God we often hear about.
Yeah.
The one who sets the universe in motion and then steps back.
Right.
In Berkeley's view, God is actively participating. And it's through our perception, our participation in this divinely orchestrated reality that we come to know the world.
Exactly. It's a philosophy about interconnectedness, about the relationship between the perceiver and the perceived, ultimately anchored in the divine.
But doesn't that get a little close to solipsism? The idea that only our individual minds exist, that we're all trapped in our own heads.
Berkeley anticipated that very critique and argued against it.
Okay.
He believed that the existence of other minds, and ultimately God's mind, is what prevents us from being locked in solitary worlds of our own making.
So it's not just about my perception.
Right.
It's about a network of perceptions, all intertwined with God as this unifying force.
Right.
I have to admit, that's a more comforting thought than being stuck in my own head.
It does offer a sense of connection, of being part of something much greater.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to note that Berkeley's later work, particularly his writings about tar water, takes on a decidedly mystical tone.
Tar water, as in the stuff you use to seal your driveway.
Right.
I'm sensing another tangent coming on.
Berkeley was full of surprises, but we'll have to save that particular rabbit hole for the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been exploring the world of George Berkeley. And let's just say this 18th century philosopher keeps surprising me.
He was a complex and multifaceted thinker, wasn't he?
Totally. But we left off on a bit of a cliffhanger last time you mentioned Berkeley's fascination with tar water. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around that one.
Yes, Berkeley's advocacy for tar water is one of the more curious aspects of his life.
Right.
In his later years, he became convinced that tar water held incredible healing properties.
Okay.
He even wrote a lengthy treatise praising it as a cure for just about every ailment imaginable.
Okay, I have to admit, this is where I get a little skeptical. Tar water.
Really? It sounds outlandish to us now, but remember, medical practices in the 18th century were very different.
Right.
Berkeley genuinely believed he had stumbled upon a cheap, accessible remedy that could help the sick, especially the poor.
So it was more about his compassion and desire to alleviate suffering than sound scientific evidence.
Exactly. Berkeley saw tar water as a potential solution to a very real problem.
Okay.
He wasn't trying to mislead anyone. He genuinely thought he was doing good.
I can appreciate that even brilliant minds can be swayed by good intentions, sometimes at the expense of their reputations.
That's true, but what's fascinating is that Berkeley's tar water treatise, titled Cirrus, wasn't just about its supposed medical benefits. Right. He used it as a springboard to delve into deeper philosophical reflection.
Oh, so there's more to this tar water thing than meets the eye.
Absolutely. In Cirrus, Berkeley goes deep into metaphysics, exploring the nature of reality, the soul, and the divine.
Wow.
He even draws on ancient Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle to support his worldview.
Wow, that's a pretty big leap from tar water to ancient Greek philosophy.
Well, Berkeley saw the universe as profoundly interconnected.
Right.
Infused with a divine presence for him, even something as seemingly mundane as tar water was part of this grand cosmic order.
So he saw a spiritual dimension even in the physical world.
Precisely, and it's in Cirrus that Berkeley's idealism takes on this mystical, almost alchemical quality.
Okay.
He describes the world as a vast network of correspondences where seemingly unrelated things are actually linked by deeper underlying principles. This idea actually resonated with later Romantic thinkers who were also drawn to a vision of a universe filled with spirit and meaning.
It sounds like even though some of Berkeley's specific ideas, like the tar water obsession, might seem a little off to us today, his broader thinking really did anticipate later intellectual movements.
He was definitely ahead of his time in many ways.
Yeah.
And while not everyone agreed with him, his willingness to challenge conventional thinking left a lasting mark on philosophy, science, and even literature.
Yeah. He made people really think about perception, reality, and the power of the mind.
So after exploring Berkeley's life, his ideas, and even his tar water obsession, what's the key takeaway for our listeners? What's the one thing they should remember about George Berkeley?
I think it's the importance of questioning our assumptions and being open to different perspectives.
Okay.
Berkeley's work reminds us that reality is far more complex and nuanced than we often assume.
Right.
Our minds play a far more active role in shaping our experience of the world than we might realize.
Well said. Berkeley's world was one where reality is deeply intertwined with perception. The very act of seeing, hearing, and thinking actively shapes the world around us. That's a pretty powerful concept, and it leaves us with a lot to ponder if our perceptions shape our reality.
Yeah.
What implications does that have for how we understand ourselves and the world around us? That's something for you, our listener, to think about.
It's a question that has resonated through centuries of philosophical debate, and on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the fascinating world of George Berkeley. Thanks for joining us on this intellectual adventure. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of ideas.